Tonight's video is a 2-hour black screen mix of true scary stories to fall asleep to, told over steady rain ambience. No jump scares, just quiet dread to help you drift off. Hey there, night wanderer. Get comfortable bed, sofa, blanket, whatever feels safe. Let the rain slow your breath. If this corner of the night calms you, tap like and whisper your time zone below. 1 a.m., 3 a.m. Now, close your eyes, settle in, and let the story begin. I never expected to return to Wren Hollow. It had been 20 years since I'd last seen the crooked chimney and moss-covered stonework of my family's old house. Back then, I was just a child, small, curious, and terrified of the shadows that pooled at the base of the staircase. We moved away not long after my 8th birthday, and the house sat empty ever since. No renters, no buyers, just the wind and the rain for company. Now, I find myself here again, not because I wanted to be, but because life has a cruel way of narrowing your options. I had nothing left in the city. After the layoff, my savings dissolved quickly. The apartment lease expired. And when my partner walked out taking half of what little we still shared, it was like someone had switched off all the lights in my life at once. Silence became a second skin. I stopped answering phone calls. I stopped making plans. I drifted. That's when the letter arrived. It was handwritten in brittle cursive, as though the paper itself came from another time. My mother's name inked across the top, but she'd been dead for over 10 years. The return address was Wren Hollow. No one should have been sending me mail from there. I opened it on the floor of my empty apartment, the dim light from a single lamp casting long, tired shadows. It wasn't long, just a few lines. You're still its keeper, if you choose to return. There's food in the cellar. The roof leaks near the west window. You'll remember the rest. M. There was no signature, no envelope, just the folded page slid under my door while I wasn't looking. It should have unsettled me, but all I felt was numb. The next morning, I left the city without telling anyone. I packed what little I had into my old car and drove north through the rolling fog. Every hour farther from the city felt like peeling off another layer of skin I didn't need anymore. It was raining when I arrived. The kind of soft, steady drizzle that blankets the air in silver. The road into Wren Hollow was narrower than I remembered, overgrown with twisted vines, tree roots, like sleeping animals under the gravel. The town was smaller too, or maybe I had just grown. A few boarded shops, a rusted bell hanging above what used to be a general store. No people in sight. I didn't stop. The road curved, then dipped. I drove past the skeletal remains of what must have been the schoolhouse. Then came the bend in the hill, and there it was, the house. It sat at the edge of the hollow like something half asleep. Sloped roof, graying stone, shutters barely clinging to their hinges. Ivy choked the porch columns. The windows were dark, but it was still standing, still waiting. I parked under the old oak, its branches clawing at the sky. The moment I stepped out, the rain seemed to hush, as if listening. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was damp and old, like forgotten paper and wet wool. The wood groaned beneath my feet. Dust clung to every surface, soft as ash, and yet it didn't smell abandoned. It smelled lived in, somehow, like someone had just left the room. I walked through each floor without turning on a single light. The power was still on. The switch in the hallway hummed faintly when I passed it. I didn't flip it. Darkness felt more honest. The kitchen looked the same, except for the mold in the sink. Upstairs, my childhood room was untouched except the bed was made, and the window had been opened just a crack, enough to let the rain's breath in. I didn't question it. I moved through the house like a ghost, retracing its death. Every step felt familiar and strange at once. The wallpaper peeled like old skin. The mirrors were darker than they should be, but the house was whole. I should have been afraid, but I wasn't. That night, I slept in the attic room. I don't know why, maybe because it was the farthest from the front door. Maybe because it was the coldest. Maybe because some part of me already knew I wouldn't be leaving for a while. The rain didn't stop. It whispered against the windows all night long. And just before sleep took me, I thought I heard something breathing beneath the floorboards. The rain never stopped. By the third day, it had become a rhythm, not something outside me, but something inside, like a second pulse. It pattered against the attic windows with steady insistence, a presence as much as a sound. I found myself listening to it more often than not, as though it might say something if I paid close enough attention. The house creaked constantly, but never the way old houses usually do. These weren't random groans of settling wood. They came at intervals, soft thuds in the hallway, one after the other, like footsteps timed to a breath I couldn't hear. I tried not to dwell on it. Instead, I kept myself busy during the day. I explored the house, room by room. There were more rooms than I remembered. That sounds absurd, I know. But I could have sworn there were only 3 bedrooms. Now there were 4, and a narrow door at the end of the second floor hallway that I didn't recall ever seeing as a child. I opened it on the 5th morning. It revealed a cramped study, lined wall to wall with books that smelled of mildew and damp parchment. Dust clung to their spines in thick layers, yet the desk beneath the window was clean, recently wiped. A single chair sat pushed in, neatly aligned. There was no lamp, just the light from the gray sky pressing in through the glass. The books were strange, not just old, unfamiliar, bound in fabric, some stitched with symbols I couldn't read. No titles, no authors. Inside, many were written in a looping script, not quite English, but close. Some pages were empty. Others had diagrams that looked like rooms drawn from above, but wrong windows in impossible places, staircases that circled in on themselves. I told myself it was just some eccentric ancestor's collection. Maybe grandfather, maybe his father before that. I couldn't remember who had lived here before us. My mother never talked about her side of the family. Still, the door to that room never creaked when opened, never resisted. It was always ready. At night, the house changed. Not visibly. The walls stayed where they were. The furniture didn't move. But the feeling of the place shifted, like someone had poured something colder into the air. A stillness would descend just after sunset, thick and breathless. I found myself whispering without knowing why. Sometimes I'd wake in the early hours, always at the same time. 3. 11 a.m. heart racing, eyes wide open before I'd even stirred, as if something had been watching me in my sleep and decided to step back the moment I woke. I never caught it, but I could feel it, the way you feel a hand pulling back from your shoulder before you turn around. One night, I left a cup of tea on the windowsill before going to bed. When I woke, it was gone. The cup returned 2 days later, placed neatly at the top of the stairs. I tried to laugh it off, to rationalize. I told myself I had misplaced it, or sleepwalked. But the laughter died in my throat when I noticed something else. The cup had been washed. The cellar became a place I avoided, even though the note, the one that brought me here, mentioned food being stored there. I never felt comfortable opening that door beneath the kitchen stairs. It was heavy, too heavy for its size. The knob was always damp, even when everything else in the kitchen was dry. On the 6th night, I thought I heard something coming up from beneath it. Not movement, not scratching, but breathing, wet and slow. That was the same night I found the photograph. It had been slipped under the attic door while I slept, not slid from inside the room, but from the hallway. I woke to find it lying just inches from my mattress. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was a black and white photo, old but in good condition. It showed the front of the house, this house, and 5 people standing on the porch. I recognized my mother, though she looked much younger. My grandfather, too, but the other 3, I had no idea who they were. Their faces were off, not blurred, not damaged, just wrong. Their features didn't quite sit right on their skulls, as if someone had tried to draw human expressions from memory and failed in tiny, unsettling ways. Their smiles were a little too wide, their eyes too flat, their postures too symmetrical. The back of the photo had a single line in the same delicate handwriting as the note that brought me here. Only the house remembers all its guests. I didn't sleep after that. Instead, I sat by the attic window and watched the trees in the distance shift and sway. The rain was heavier that night, loud enough to drown out the heartbeat in my ears. I could have sworn I saw a light moving between the trees. Not a flashlight, something duller, pulsing, like a lantern carried in slow circles. I stayed still until dawn, and even then, the feeling didn't go away. By the end of the first week, I started losing time. I'd go downstairs to make coffee and find an empty mug already sitting on the counter. I'd light a candle in the bathroom, only to return and find it melted halfway down. The old wall clock in the study ticked backward for a full minute before correcting itself. I began to doubt my own thoughts. Was I imagining all of it? Was the isolation getting to me? The silence in the house was constant, not peaceful silence, but expectant, like holding your breath too long, like waiting for something to begin. And yet, I stayed. Maybe because I had nowhere else to go. Or maybe, just maybe, some part of me wanted to know what the house was waiting for. I started keeping notes in a journal I found in the study. Most of the pages were torn out, but enough remained to write. My entries were scattered. Observations, sounds, weather, a list of things I'd misplaced, things I'd found. A single sentence kept appearing, even when I didn't remember writing it. The house is learning me. By the 10th day, the mirrors no longer showed my reflection at night. Only the room behind me, but never me. I don't know how many days have passed. Time has become soft here like damp paper, easily smudged. The wall clock ticks steadily now, but never the same hour twice. I keep glancing at my phone out of habit, only to remember I let the battery die a week ago. Or was it longer? The charger is gone anyway. One morning I checked the kitchen drawer where I knew I kept it, and instead found a spoon bent into a perfect spiral. I've stopped trying to explain things to myself. There's a strange peace in that surrender. It began when I discovered the hallway that didn't exist before. It was early, maybe dawn, maybe earlier, and I'd gone downstairs for water. The rain was lighter that morning, misting rather than falling. The windows were fogged from the inside, like the house was breathing against the glass. As I walked past the sitting room, I noticed something strange. The wall was deeper, not visibly, but spatially. The distance between the bookcase and the kitchen entryway felt longer, as if the house had taken a breath and stretched. And there, where a coat rack used to stand, was a narrow hallway I had never seen before. It was only about 20 feet long, lined with peeling wallpaper and 2 doors, both closed. The hallway didn't appear again in daylight. I tried to find it later, retracing every step, pressing every wall, but it was gone. Just a blank surface where it had been. That night, it returned. Same length, same 2 doors. The first door opened easily. A small room, bare wooden floor, single chair in the corner, and a painting on the wall. The painting was of the hallway itself, but in the painting, the second door was open. I stared at it for a long time. The second door in the real hallway remained locked. I tried the handle every night for 3 nights. It never budged. On the 4th night, the painting changed. Now it showed a figure standing in the hallway, facing the second door. No face, just a dark outline, human-shaped, thin, waiting. I stopped going down that hallway. The attic room, where I still slept, had begun to change too, subtly. I woke one morning and found the window facing the wrong direction. It had always looked out over the grove behind the house, where the trees swayed like slow dancers. But now, it overlooked the front porch. I told myself I was misremembering, that I'd simply confused east with west. But when I stepped outside to confirm, the attic window wasn't there. It was gone, as though the house had smoothed over that piece of itself, like skin healing a wound. There were whispers, too. Not voices, not quite. More like layers of breath, folded into one another. Sometimes just outside the door, sometimes beneath the bed. They never said anything I could understand, but they carried rhythm, intention, like the beginning of a language I didn't know I could speak. Then came the dreams. I dreamt of walls that pulsed like lungs, of ceilings that wept, of narrow stairwells lined with mirrors that reflected not my image, but other rooms, places I'd never seen, yet knew belonged to the house. One dream showed me the cellar door wide open, the stairs descending endlessly into water. When I woke, my feet were wet, and the journal, the one I'd been using to keep notes, had changed. Not all at once, but over time. Pages I hadn't written on now bore lines of text, sometimes in my handwriting, sometimes not, the ink always fresh. I once found a page folded into the center with a diagram of the house. But the layout was wrong. Rooms looped. Staircases doubled back. There were rooms underground. A notation read, "Root chamber, only in rain." I've never found that room. Not while awake. One evening, I tried to leave. It wasn't a decision, just a sudden need, like the final gasp of someone realizing they've been drowning. I threw a bag together and bolted to the car. I didn't even lock the door behind me. The rain came harder the moment I stepped onto the porch, a slamming wall of water that soaked through my jacket in seconds. The car wouldn't start. Not a click, not a flicker of dashboard light, just silence. I tried to scream. I think I did. But the sound felt muffled, like the air itself was too dense for my voice to travel. When I turned back toward the house, the porch light was on. It had never worked before. And in its glow, I saw something standing in the window upstairs, watching, tall, thin, faceless. I walked back, not because I wanted to, but because I felt pulled, not by fear, not by force, but by invitation. The house wanted me back. I entered, dripping and shivering. As I stepped over the threshold, I heard a sound behind me. Not thunder, not wind. The front door locked itself. That night, I opened every closet, every drawer, every cabinet, searching for some sign of what this place was, some clue, some exit. Instead, I found a note pinned to the back of a painting in the upstairs hallway. It was the same handwriting as the original letter. "Do not open the second door, not until it's yours." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the attic, watching the space where the window used to be, trying to remember what direction the trees once grew. The house has begun speaking more clearly now, not with words, but with arrangement. Chairs I don't remember moving face corners that weren't there yesterday. The old radio in the kitchen sometimes switches on by itself and plays static that almost becomes melody. One morning I woke up to find a trail of dried leaves laid across the stairs, perfectly spaced, each leaf folded in half. They led to the cellar door. I didn't follow them. Not yet, but I will, because the house is teaching me its language, one room at a time, and soon, I think, it will ask me to speak back. I opened the second door on the 12th night. I don't remember deciding to do it. I only remember standing in front of it, the brass knob cool beneath my fingertips, the wallpaper around it torn in a perfect circle, like something had coiled there for a long time. The hallway appeared again just after midnight. The painting on the wall, which had once shown the hallway itself, was now blank. A smear of gray, a space awaiting something. There was no sound. When the door opened, it swung inward easily, like it had always been meant to. The room beyond was not a room. It was a corridor, long, narrow, made of stone that dripped with condensation. The air was thick and warm, like breath exhaled from lungs too old to speak. I stepped inside without hesitation. The door closed behind me. I didn't try to open it again. The walls pulsed as I walked, not visibly, but rhythmically. I felt it in the soles of my feet, a low internal thrum that resonated like a distant heart. I lost track of time in that tunnel. There were no turns, no lights, No sounds except my own footsteps, muffled by the wet ground. At one point, I stopped and touched the wall. It was damp, and beneath the dampness, I felt something move, slowly, like the twitch of muscle just under skin. The passage ended without warning. One moment I was walking, the next, I stood in a vast, circular chamber. The ceiling was impossibly high, fading into shadow. The floor was smooth, black stone, glistening like oil. In the center stood a single chair. It faced a mirror. I approached it slowly, drawn forward like a dream pulls you past logic. The mirror was large, taller than me, framed in a dark metal that seemed to hum faintly. But it wasn't my reflection that waited there. It was the house. I don't know how else to describe it. I saw rooms in the mirror, not all at once, but shifting, bleeding into one another like wet ink. The attic, the kitchen, the study, the hallway, the cellar stairs. But they were different. Empty, old. Each one flickered like memory. And in every room, someone stood where I had once stood. Different people, different times. A woman in a dress that belonged to another century. A child holding a candle. An old man with sunken eyes. All of them watched something in the mirror. All of them alone. And then I saw myself. But not as I was. This version of me looked worn, hollow, like time had passed differently in the reflection. My eyes were darker, my skin pale. I reached toward the mirror, and the reflection smiled. I stepped back, and as I did, I saw something else. Behind me, in the mirror, a figure, tall, thin, its body blurred, shifting like mist under glass. It stood just behind my shoulder, but when I turned, there was nothing, only the cold air. I ran. The tunnel did not end where it had begun. I emerged into a part of the house I had never seen, a stairwell spiraling downward, lined with photographs that changed every time I blinked. My own face began to appear among them. At first, in the background, a reflection in a window, a blurred silhouette. Then, in the center, smiling, always smiling. The deeper I descended, the more the walls began to breathe. The wallpaper moved subtly, as though stirred by an invisible wind. The lights overhead, flickering bulbs in glass cages, pulsed in time with my heartbeat. At the bottom of the stairs, I found the root chamber, just as the journal had described. It was not made of wood or stone. It was made of roots, thick, twisted tendrils that crawled down from the ceiling, pulsing with slow light, like veins carrying memory instead of blood. In the center of the chamber stood a basin filled with black water, and above it, suspended in the air, was the same faceless figure I had seen in the attic window. No features, just shape, suggestion. It did not speak, but I understood. The house was alive, not in the way we understand living things, not with organs or breath or thoughts, but with memory, with purpose, with roles. It kept those who entered. It watched them, learned them, and in time, it became them. Each guest was another room added, another rhythm, another voice in the rain. It had no master, no God. It simply was a cycle, an old, patient engine of identity, and I had stepped into its machinery. I wanted to scream, but the house doesn't like loud things. Instead, I knelt beside the basin and looked into the water. I saw the woman from the photograph, the one who stood beside my mother on the porch, her face stretched too wide. I saw her walking through this same house, whispering to herself in a language of clicks and hushes. I saw her become still. Then I saw myself again, in the study, then the kitchen, then the attic, doing the same things, making the same expressions. I wasn't watching a memory. I was watching a script. One the house had written for me, and I had been performing it perfectly. When I stood, the figure was gone. So was the water. The basin had become empty stone. I walked back up the stairs, and this time, they led me home. If home is what you can call a place that knows your name before you speak it. The second door was gone. Only blank wall remained. That night, the cellar door opened on its own. Inside, I found shelves lined with canned food just as the note had said, but behind them was another door, smaller, carved into the stone, and on it, scratched with what looked like fingernails, was a single word: stay. The cellar door stayed open for 3 nights. I didn't go back down right away. I didn't need to, because the house had already let me see what was beneath it, not in form, but in function. That second, smaller door with the word stay carved into it hadn't been a warning. It was a command, or an invitation. By then, I wasn't sure which mattered more. I didn't feel fear anymore, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after you've finished grieving and there's nothing left to mourn, only the slow reassembling of thought into something less sharp, less human, maybe. I walked the halls without checking where they led. The rooms had softened, or maybe I had. Either way, the house no longer resisted me. The attic window was back. One morning, I woke to sunlight creeping in through the glass, real sunlight, not that gray smear the rain always brought. The grove outside was still, and for the first time since arriving, I saw no rain, no mist, only the stillness of something waiting. That's when I realized what I had become. Not a prisoner, not a guest, but a part. The house wasn't holding me. It was becoming me. Or perhaps I was becoming it. It knew my thoughts now. I would feel doors open before I touched them. The kettle would already be warm when I reached the kitchen. The journal filled in my thoughts before I wrote them down. Sometimes I'd stand in front of a mirror and watch myself move half a second late, as if the reflection needed to agree with my decision before obeying. There were moments I wasn't sure if I was the original anymore. If the version of me who ran to the car in the rain was the same one who now sat quietly by the hearth at night, listening to the soft tick of the grandfather clock. I didn't speak aloud for days. Then one evening, I whispered, "Am I still me?" And the house answered not with words, not with sound, but with arrangement. All the clocks reset to the same time. 3:11 a.m. The moment I always woke up, before the house fully took notice of me. The moment between who I was and who I would become. I understood. The people in the photograph, they hadn't been haunting the house. They were sustaining it. Like memory preserves a voice long after it's gone. Their roles had ended. Mine was beginning. So I began to write. Not to escape, but to record. I don't know if this will ever reach anyone, or if the house will even allow it to leave. But if it does, if these pages find their way out through cracks in the wall or whispers in the rain, then remember this. There is a place at the edge of Wren Hollow, a stone house with too many rooms and windows that don't always face the same way. It calls to those who have lost too much, or perhaps those who have nothing left to give but themselves. If you arrive, the door will be unlocked. The power will still work. There will be food in the cellar. And at first, you will think it's kindness, that you've inherited something warm, familiar, even safe. But the house does not keep people. It keeps becoming them. And someday, you'll find a hallway that wasn't there before, a second door, a mirror, and you will see the person you were the last flicker of resistance before the house folds you into its walls like it has done with so many before. I am not afraid. I think I will stay. I think I already have. If you're still awake, a gentle tap on the like button helps us make more night stories. They gave me a checklist, not instructions, not a contract, just a checklist titled Redmare Lighthouse, Winter Cycle Maintenance, Solo Post. I found it folded in half, inside an envelope, taped to the front door of the supply shed. No one was there to meet me. No supervisor, no welcome, not even a note, just the list and a key. I unlocked the door myself. Inside, the air was salt-heavy and sharp, like rusted chain and low tide, the kind of smell that never entirely leaves your clothes. I stood in the narrow foyer and read the checklist again. Test radio equipment. Record signal strength. Maintain generator. Stay off the rocks. Lock tower door after dark. Do not keep a log after 11 p.m. If the foghorn calls twice, wait. If it calls 3 times, do not answer. No explanations. No initials. Just that. I took the job because I needed to be somewhere else. Anywhere else, really. The kind of place where my phone wouldn't work, where no one could send condolences I wasn't ready to receive, where the sound of the ocean might smooth out the edges of everything I was carrying. My brother had passed away 3 months earlier. Not suddenly, the opposite. It was long, slow, the kind of goodbye that gets stretched across hospital rooms and morphine drips and things left unsaid until it's too late. We hadn't spoken in years, not properly, and yet when he died, I was the one they called. He used to tell me about lighthouses. He'd had a strange obsession with them as a kid, not nautical ones, not postcard perfect, the isolated ones, the ones on maps no one used. He once told me he liked them because they're the last to know when something goes wrong. I thought about that a lot when I got the posting. Redmare sits on a jagged strip of cliff above the Atlantic. The land bridge leading to it is only visible at low tide. The rest of the time, it's cut off a tooth of land in the mouth of winter waves. The structure is old, brick over stone, 3 floors, spiral stairs, a light that no longer rotates but still burns red in fog. The living quarters are modest. A bed, a stove, a desk facing the sea. There's no television, no service, No one within 15 miles. Just the list. And the sea. The first night, I slept deeply. Too deeply. The kind of sleep where you wake uncertain what day it is or where you are. When I stirred around 10 a.m., the room was thick with cold and the window covered in condensation. I wiped it away and saw nothing but white. The fog already rolled in heavy, blanketing the world to the edge of the glass. The radio sat silent. I logged the generator output, checked the battery bank, recorded my readings in the ledger. By noon, I'd finished the entire checklist. I thought about adding more, but the lighthouse didn't seem to want extra input. There was something complete about it, like it had already learned how to run on its own. That night, I heard the first foghorn. Low, distant, one call only. It echoed through the walls like breath. I wrote it down, went to bed, didn't dream. By day 5, I no longer trusted the walls. Not that they moved not in the obvious way, but they adjusted, slightly, silently, as if compensating for something I hadn't noticed yet. The desk, for instance. I was sure it faced the sea when I arrived. I remembered that clearly, sitting my first morning with coffee going lukewarm, staring out at nothing but fog. But now it faced the interior wall. No signs of movement, no scuffs, just a new orientation, like it had always been that way. I moved it back. By morning, it had turned again. The checklist changed too, subtly. The original copy was handwritten, block letters in a fine black pen, neat, standard. But on the 7th morning, a new item appeared halfway down the page. Listen carefully. Between 2 and 3 a.m. No one had touched the paper. I hadn't written it, and yet the handwriting matched mine perfectly. Even the slight tilt on my lowercase e. That night, I sat up at the desk, still turned inward, and waited. Rain had started around midnight, steady and fine, whispering against the windows. The lighthouse was utterly still. Even the beacon was dark. The fog had lifted just enough to deactivate it. At 2:14, I heard the first sound. A distant hum, low and wide, like something vast shifting underwater. Then, faintly, voices. Not words, just syllables, rising and falling in rhythm. It sounded like a choir warming up through static. I leaned toward the window. Nothing but night. But the sound wasn't out there. It was in the walls, vibrating through the beams, tuning the glass. Almost like the lighthouse was practicing a voice. The next day, the fog returned. Heavier, colorless, a full whiteout from every angle. The edge of the cliff was gone, the sea swallowed whole. I logged my readings, made coffee, and when I returned to the checklist, a new note had appeared at the bottom. Don't turn around during the third horn. There had been no second. That night, at 1:56 a.m., I heard it. The second foghorn. Not faint, like before, closer. Hungrier. It didn't echo like the first. It lingered, vibrating the pipes, making the floorboards shift under my boots. I waited for the third. None came, but I didn't sleep. Not well, because I woke at 4:09 a.m. with the blankets folded, perfectly, hospital corner tight, and I never make my bed. The journal I'd brought to keep myself anchored, small, leather, stitched, began to fill on its own. Not whole pages, just phrases at first. We remember what you forget. Do not record what cannot be kept. The light must remain unspoken. Stop logging in. Ink. Then, drawings. The lighthouse viewed from above, but distorted, wider at the base, with rooms that didn't exist. One spiral extended downward below the rock. On the 10th morning, the foghorn blew once again, just once. Low, barely audible, but this time the checklist was already updated. I didn't notice at first, only when I flipped it over, looking for the last day's entries, and found 3 new rules handwritten in the margins. If the light shines red after 4 a.m., close your eyes. If you see your reflection in the beacon glass, do not wave. If something else is in the stairwell, do not descend. I stood at the bottom of the tower for nearly an hour that night, listening, waiting, but the stairs remained empty. The red light never turned on. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being trained for something, that the lighthouse had started timing me, like I was part of a routine it had run through many times before. By the 12th night, I began waking to completed logs I didn't write. Each morning, the maintenance ledger would be filled in generator readings, wind speed, tide schedule, even signature, in my handwriting, but I remembered only fragments of the night before. How I had started the entries, how I had blinked, and suddenly they were finished. Dates accurate, details correct, but distant, like watching a recording of myself doing it rather than remembering the act. I stopped using the journal. It kept answering me. I'd write a single line. I didn't hear the horn last night. And the next page would contain, you did. You just weren't supposed to respond. One night, I tore out a page and burned it in the wood stove. The next morning, the entry had returned. Same handwriting, same ink, just slightly. Earlier in the book, the beacon began to rotate again. I never turned it back on. One evening, around 3:00 a.m., I climbed the tower out of habit and found the entire mechanism humming softly, the lens sweeping in a perfect arc, despite the switch at the base still flipped off. I stood in front of the glass, watching the red light pass across the fog, and for a moment, I saw my own reflection not mirrored exactly, but delayed. It moved just a half second too late. Then, it smiled. I hadn't. That night, the foghorn called 3 times. Soft, measured, from far out at sea. I froze, remembering the checklist. If it calls 3 times, do not answer. So I didn't. But the tower shook anyway, just slightly, as though disappointed. On the 15th day, I discovered the second journal. It was tucked beneath the floorboards of the sleeping quarters, wrapped in oiled canvas. The leather was worn smooth, pages soft, stained with seawater, and on the inside cover, in faded ink, R. Loring, winter cycle, year unknown. I read it cover to cover. The writing started strong, technical, observant. then gradually shifted. Shorter entries, stranger phrasing. By the halfway point, the tone had changed entirely. The lighthouse is teaching me to stay still. It hums when I forget things. I am being overwritten. When I look in the window now, I don't always see me. She speaks through the fog. Her rhythm is the horn. The final page simply read, "I've finished logging." She logs me now. I couldn't sleep that night. Every shadow seemed to ripple, not move, not grow, just shift in tone, like they were listening. The red light flickered once, twice, then stopped. And in the dark, I swear I heard footsteps in the stairwell. Not approaching, just waiting. On the 17th morning, I awoke to a sound I couldn't place. Not the horn, not the rain. It was soft, mechanical, typing. I followed it to the desk. The typewriter I hadn't touched since arriving now, tapping by itself. Each key pressed slowly, deliberately, spelling out, "I have learned your walk. I have learned your breathing. You are almost still enough." Then silence. The ribbon wound tight. No power. No hands. Later that day, I tried to find the land bridge. Low tide had just passed. But the path was gone. Not submerged. Gone. Only jagged, seaweed-streaked rocks stretching for miles. No signs of the old wood planks. No trail markers. Just ocean. Flat and endless. I stood at the edge for a long time, the cold creeping up my legs. And I heard the horn, just once, from directly behind me. I returned to the tower and found a new checklist on the desk. Typed, no handwriting, no stains, fresh paper, and at the top, Cycle 2, Replication Stage. It listed tasks I'd never done before. Stand at the beacon for 3 minutes. Breathe with the horn. Face your reflection. Forget. Begin. Again. At the bottom, in small gray type, you are not the first, but you're the clearest. The fourth horn call didn't come from the sea. It came from below. Somewhere deep in the foundation, lower than the fog, beneath even the bedrock. It was lower in pitch, too heavier, like a pulse made audible, a heartbeat inside the tower. I had been logging my days without realizing how long they'd been, because the sky didn't change anymore. Not truly. Cloud, fog, rain. Cloud, fog, rain. Red light, white sea. Red light, white sea. The checklist updated daily. Always typed. Always precise. The tasks had changed. I wasn't maintaining anything anymore. Now the list simply read, sit in the beam for 1 hour. Say nothing until after sunrise. Let the glass remember your face. Echo your last words. Do not speak after the 3rd repetition. Do not listen to the version at the top of the stairs. That night, I climbed the tower and looked for the reflection again. It was already there, waiting for me. Not moving, just watching. The glass had lost its reflective quality. Now, it was a window, and behind it, a room identical to mine. Same stairs, same lamp, same narrow lens. Only this time, I saw the version of me I hadn't quite realized was missing. Still, hollow-eyed, breathing too slow. Its lips moved. I listened, but it wasn't speaking in my voice. It was using his. My brother's. I didn't run. There was nowhere to go. I descended the stairs instead. The hum in the walls became a rhythm. Familiar. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't electricity. It was respiration. Inhale through the vent pipes. Exhale through the horn. Back in the supply room, the typewriter was active again. No one touched it. It clacked softly. One line, repeated. The roll remembers you. The roll remembers you. The roll remembers you. The checklist updated again. This time, it was one word only. Submit. That night, I saw the extra door. Halfway up the stairwell, where no door had been before. Rust-streaked metal. Old naval bolts. A plate above it, dulled by sea wind. I wiped it clean. Etched into the brass. Cycle room A. Archive. In process. I unlocked it without a key. The room beyond was narrow. Windowless. Lined with mirrors not reflecting glass, but recording panels. Each one shimmered faintly with heat. And in each one, a version of me. Sleeping, typing, staring, crying. Dozens of poses. Dozens of me. Some blinking. Some whispering things I couldn't hear. Some facing away, like they knew I was watching. There was no control panel. No off switch. Just one plaque bolted into the far wall. Lighthouse Red Mare. Behavioral Imaging Station 6. All patterns must be sealed in repetition. All rhythms must be clear. All reflections must eventually wave. This light is not for warning. This light is for learning. Thank you for your role. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, watching, and then something behind the mirrors breathed back. Not in echo, but in practice, as if rehearsing how to be me. I ran back to the bedroom, or what had once been the bedroom. Now it was wrong. The cot too short, the pillow too flat. The books were missing, replaced with hollow shells that had blank pages when opened. Even my boots had changed smaller, worn in the wrong places. I opened my journal. The entries were gone. All of them. Replaced with variations of the same sentence. He adjusted well. He adjusted well. He adjusted well. And at the very bottom, Cycle 3. Readiness 90. 7%. I stopped reading the checklist. It didn't matter anymore. Even when it changed, and it always changed, the actions it listed were ones I'd already done. Stand here. Sit there. Watch the beam. Forget the hour. Forget the day. Forget the point. The final entry simply read, "Remain. We'll take it from here." That morning, I found a version of myself sitting at the desk, breathing, blinking, staring out the window at fog that never lifted. The chair creaked softly beneath him, like it always did when I leaned back. I stood there and watched him for a long time, then walked past him, down the stairs, and into the heart of the lighthouse to the cycle room, to the mirrors. They no longer reflected anything. Now they were doors, and behind them, other versions of this moment, other roles practiced endlessly. A second me at the radio, a third reading aloud from the checklist, eyes unfocused, a fourth lying motionless in the cot, mouthing the words. I adjusted well. I don't know when I made the choice. It wasn't sudden. There was no moment of decision, just a gentle quiet that settled in like giving up a story I no longer needed to tell. I walked to the beacon tower, sat beneath the red glass, closed my eyes, and waited for the light to pass through me, not to warn, not to guide, but to finalize. Now, I live in the rhythm. I hum when the walls do. I breathe when the foghorn calls. I no longer track the days. I no longer write the log, because the lighthouse writes me. If you come to Redmare, if your name ends up on that checklist, you won't meet me, but you'll meet the role I've become. You'll hear my boots on the stairs when you're half asleep. You'll see my shadow on the fogged window, turn just slightly away. And if you ever feel the urge to wave at your reflection in the beacon glass, don't, because I might wave back, and you won't like how close I get it. If you're still awake, a gentle tap on the like button helps us make more night stories. I didn't choose the island because it was beautiful. I chose it because no one would come looking for me there. It was the kind of place that didn't appear on most maps, just a single rocky outcrop in the North Atlantic, battered by storms and surrounded by gray-green water that never really calmed. A stub of land with a single lighthouse, a keeper's cottage, and a supply shed, nothing else. No visitors, no traffic, just the wind, the sea, and the sound of the lantern turning. I'd read about the post on an obscure agency job board. Temporary assignment, remote post, off-season storm watch, 4 weeks alone, while the regular keeper was recovering from surgery. They needed someone who could operate the basics. Fuel the lamp, keep the lens clean, monitor the generator. They didn't care about my background, or my references, or the fact I hadn't worked a lighthouse before. All they needed was someone who wouldn't ask questions, and that suited me just fine. I arrived just after the autumn gales had begun. The ferry that dropped me off was little more than a fishing boat. The pilot didn't speak to me. He just handed me a key, wrapped in wax paper, and nodded once, before turning back into the fog. As I stepped onto the dock, the wind bit through my coat. The sea slapped against the rocks with a slow, wet anger. The lighthouse stood ahead, pale and narrow, its windows dark. A weathered sign read, Bracken Isle Light, Est 1871. No welcome, no instructions, just the groan of the wind through iron railings. The keeper's cottage was a single-floor stone structure next to the base of the tower. It smelled of salt and old paper. The furniture was sparse: a cot, a wood stove, a desk with water-damaged logs stacked high. There was no television, no phone, just a shortwave radio I was told to use for emergencies only. The only working electricity came from a generator that I had to refuel every 3 days. And the lamp, of course. The lantern never stopped turning. Even when I arrived, Even before I touched a single switch, it was already moving a slow, sweeping arc, casting pale light across the open sea. I didn't question it. Not yet. The first few nights passed without incident. I walked the tower twice a day, checked the fuel, wiped the lens, noted the humidity in the logs. The radio remained silent. The generator hummed on schedule, and the storms came long stretches of rain that made the windows tremble and the roof sweat. I told myself the isolation was good for me, that it was better than waking up in my apartment, staring at the empty side of the bed. I told myself I was healing, but every time the lantern swept across the rocks, I felt uneasy, like it wasn't warning ships, like it was searching. I began having strange dreams, always the same. I stood in the lantern room, surrounded by the roar of rain. The light turned and turned, but outside, in the darkness, something blinked back. Not a ship, not an animal, something vast, tall enough that it rose beyond the cliffs, close enough that I should have heard it move, but I didn't. Its eyes never blinked at the same time, and just before I woke, I always heard the same sound. Not a voice. Not exactly. Just 3 words, low and wet. You're already here. I stopped sleeping through the night. The tower creaked and groaned with the rhythm of something alive. Sometimes the stairs felt longer on the way down than they had on the way up. Once, I turned a corner inside the tower and found myself facing a wall that hadn't been there the day before. The next morning, it was gone. The logs I was supposed to fill out each day, they were already filled. Each page dated in advance, each entry in my handwriting. I told myself I was tired, that the storms were getting to me, but the truth sat heavy in my chest every time I climbed into the lantern room and saw the light moving on its own, always sweeping, always looking, even when I cut the power. It moved anyway, and when I placed my hand on the brass housing, it was warm. Warm like breath. There's no mistaking it anymore. Something is watching the island, and the light isn't keeping it away. It's calling it closer. It started with the staircase. I was halfway up the tower on a fog-heavy morning, carrying a replacement bulb for one of the auxiliary lamps. I knew the spiral by heart by then. 43 steps. A narrow landing every 15. But that morning, I passed the same water stain 3 times. Same shape. Same smudge where the rust bled down the wall. When I turned and counted the steps back down, there were 67. The next day, it was 43 again. I stopped counting after that. The lamp continued to turn, even when powered off. I made a point to shut it down that evening. No mechanical hum, no flick of rotation, nothing. I watched it stop with my own eyes. Then, I stepped outside to catch some air. The sea mist hit my face like breath. When I looked back up, the light swept across the rocks again. There was no electricity left in the tank when I checked the generator. It should have been dead. And yet, the entire lantern assembly was aglow, casting a pale green sheen through the fog, illuminating nothing in particular. That was the first time I noticed the shadows on the water. They didn't match the lighthouse. They moved differently, a little slower, a little wider, and they lingered long after the light passed over them. I began to hear things. At first, it was subtle, faint tapping on the glass at night, just above my bed, always from outside, even during the worst winds. Then came the whispers, soft, just under the wind, just behind the sound of rain. I couldn't make out words at first, but one night they formed a sentence. A whisper I heard right behind my ear as I leaned over the railing of the tower. The first light was not meant for us. I started checking the logs obsessively. Each entry, the weather, the wind speed, humidity, sea state, was already written days in advance. They all had my handwriting, but I hadn't written them. At least, I don't remember writing them. The entries became less clinical over time. Some had notes scribbled in the margins. Sound in the fog. Not wind. Light turned 6x. Without source. Door at base unlocked this morning. No sign of entry. Something is beneath the foundation. On October 12, I read an entry for the day after. I saw myself in the lens today, but I didn't blink. The lens began showing things it shouldn't. Each night, I'd wipe it clean, inspecting it for cracks or condensation. The Fresnel glass was ancient but pristine, divided into tight, glimmering panels that magnified and distorted everything around it. But now, when I leaned close, I saw the room behind me reflected wrong. The shadows stretched toward the lens instead of away, and in the corner, someone stood behind me. When I turned, no one was there. But when I looked back at the lens, they were a step closer. The shoreline changed one morning, not subtly. A rock formation that had always stood just beyond the west bluff was gone, not crumbled or eroded, just missing. In its place, a smooth depression in the sand, as though something heavy had risen and left. The footprints were massive. Not boots, not paws, just long impressions in the wet earth, as if something had dragged itself out of the sea and into the woods near the cottage. I didn't follow. The rain stopped for 2 days. I thought I would feel relief, but the silence was worse. The stillness pressed against the windows like a held breath. That second night, without rain, the lighthouse began to echo. I don't mean sound bouncing. I mean voices. Footsteps I didn't make. Coughs. I didn't cough. Breathing low. Hoarse. Not mine. Once, I dropped a mug. The shatter was sharp. A moment later, from upstairs, I heard the same sound. Exactly the same. I considered leaving, but there was nowhere to go. The radio no longer worked, only static now, deep and pulsing. The buttons felt damp. When I lifted the handset, a faint voice whispered, "Why did you leave us in the dark?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Then, the reflection changed again. This time, in the mirror near the sink, a small round thing nailed to the wall when I arrived. I leaned in one morning to splash water on my face, and I saw the lantern room behind me. Not the kitchen, not my own face, just the upper tower. Only, it wasn't raining there. It was red, and someone was in the window, smiling with all their teeth. The next day, I boarded the mirror up. The day after that, it reappeared on the opposite wall. and the reflection showed the sea, still and black, with something swimming just below the surface, slow, long, impossible. And that same smile, the whispers returned to the staircase. Each time I ascended to the lantern room, I heard them muttering behind the walls. Not always English, not always words. Sometimes laughter dry and wrong. Sometimes humming off-key. Once, I swear I heard someone say, "You've always kept the light, even before you were born." I no longer trust the island. Paths change when I'm not looking. The sky has remained gray for 4 days. The sea no longer reflects light. The seagulls are gone. Only crows remain. They perch on the railing of the catwalk and watch me without blinking. Sometimes, I think they speak in tones I almost understand. I am writing this now because I need to remember something. The logs are not mine. The lamp is not off, even when it is. The island is moving. And tonight, I saw the boat that brought me here. It was drifting in the cove, empty. It was the 31st day when I found the basement. I hadn't seen a door there before, not in the keeper's cottage, not in the tower. But that morning, it was simply there, half obscured beneath the old cot I slept on. An iron hatch, ringed with rust. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the kind of dread usually reserved for the moment before a car crash. The sick certainty that whatever lay beneath had been waiting for me to notice. I didn't open it. Not that day. The air changed again. I woke that night to find the lantern light was no longer white. It had turned a deep amber, almost red, and the fog outside glowed as if lit from within. I climbed the tower slowly, feeling each wooden stair flex under my boots. The light wasn't casting beams anymore. It pulsed, like a heartbeat, and when I placed my hand on the brass housing, it felt warm, alive. It shuddered once, under my touch, like it recognized me. The reflection in the lens returned. Only this time, it didn't move when I did. I leaned forward. The figure remained still. It wore my face, yes, but there was something wrong with the expression. Too calm, too serene. Its eyes didn't blink. Its lips parted slightly, as though whispering something I couldn't hear. I covered the lens with a cloth. The cloth caught fire. No flame, just smoke. As if the fabric had aged a century in an instant. Time unraveled after that. I began losing hours. Once, I looked at the clock above the stove. It read 10:17 a.m. I boiled water for tea, wrote 2 lines in my notebook, and looked back. 4:42 p.m. Another time, I woke up outside, on the catwalk. No memory of climbing the tower. No coat, no boots. Just bare feet on the rain-slicked metal, the sea below foaming like something alive, and the light turning overhead but slower now. Too slow. I tried marking the days on the wall, but the marks kept disappearing. I carved them with a knife, 1 line per morning. Each night, they were gone. Once, I found the lines recarved in reverse, a spiral instead of tally marks. A single phrase etched beneath, in my own handwriting. "You're going the wrong direction." I opened the basement on the 35th day. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Resignation. The iron hatch groaned like something exhaling after a long sleep. Inside, stairs slick with moss, descending into darkness. The walls were made of the same stone as the foundation, but older, like something had been carved downward long before the tower was ever built. I carried a lantern. Each step echoed. Each breath felt farther from air. At the bottom, a narrow corridor, slick walls, the smell of brine and rust and something sour. And at the end, a door. No knob, no hinges, just a flat panel of smooth black stone. On its surface, a shallow depression the size of a palm. I didn't touch it. Not that time. When I returned to the surface, the sky was wrong. The clouds no longer moved. They hung like painted smoke across the horizon, fixed in place. And the sea was still. Not calm still. Frozen in motion. Waves caught mid-crest. Salt spray suspended in the air, as if time had been paused, and only I had continued moving. Only the light still turned, casting its amber beam over an ocean that no longer rippled. That night, I dreamed again. But this time I wasn't in the tower. I was beneath it, below the stone, below the island, in a great chamber filled with water, dark, slow-moving water that never reflected. And in the center, something rose. Not a creature, not even a shape, just presence, awareness. And from it came words that didn't pass through my ears, but into me. The first light was a wound. You are the salve. Keep watching. I began to question my memory. Photos I'd brought with me of home, of her, were fading. The faces were softening. One of the pictures was blank entirely. The ink dissolved. And the journal entries I'd written weren't in my handwriting anymore. They were older, looped cursive. A different name. R. Talbot, 1883. Something in the fog again tonight. Singing this time. I think the light is feeding it. I think I'm feeding it. On the 38th day, I saw the reflection again, this time in the sea. The light swept past the waves, and there, mirrored in the amber glow, was the figure again. Closer, standing on the water, smiling. It raised one hand in greeting, or in beckoning, and behind it, something vast stirred beneath the surface, a shadow the size of the island, shifting just enough to ripple the sea across the stillness. I didn't look again. That evening, the light refused to turn off. I cut the power. I unplugged the fuses. I turned the switch myself. Still, it turned, and turned, and turned. That was the night I touched the door beneath the lighthouse. It opened without a sound, and what I saw inside was my room. The same cot, the same stove, the same window, but older, water-stained, covered in seaweed and mold, as if it had been waiting for centuries. And sitting on the bed was me, or something like me, pale, smiling, rotten at the edges. It looked up and whispered, "The light is not to warn them. It is to blind you." I shut the door. I ran. I climbed the tower, and the light was gone. Not off. Gone. No housing. No lens. No lantern, just an empty room at the top of the tower, open to the wind. And behind me, a whisper. You've kept the watch. Now it will keep you. After the light vanished, the tower no longer made sense. I climbed the stairs again and again, expecting the room to be there, expecting glass and lens, lamp housing, brass gears. But the top had changed. Sometimes it was a flat platform open to the sky. Sometimes it was an empty void. Once, it was a room of mirrors tall, thin panes pressed against one another, reflecting me infinitely. Only the me in the reflections didn't move when I did. They stood still, and they all stared at something behind me. I never turned around. The island stopped behaving like land. The grass beneath my boots grew darker, spongier. The dirt smelled wrong, not like earth, but like something rotting underwater. And the sea? Gone. Not receded. Not drained. Just absent. When I stood on the cliff's edge, there was nothing but fog. Endless gray stretching in every direction. The birds were gone. The wind didn't move. The only sound left was my heartbeat, and even that felt borrowed. I tried the radio again. Static. Until I heard my own voice. Don't stop watching. It only sleeps when it sees itself. Then laughter. My laughter. But older, slower, like it had forgotten what joy was supposed to feel like. I found a journal tucked in the roots of the old fir near the tower base. It was dry despite the soil. The cover was embossed. Log, Keeper, 1. Inside, the pages were stained with salt, and the ink had bled, but I could still read some of it. First arrival 1871. The fog was thicker then. We thought it would lift. It didn't. They sent a second light, then a third. Each one made it worse. Now the tower is a gate. The lens turns on its own. The watchers must stay. One always above, one always below. That's when I remembered the basement again. The door of black stone. The room that looked like mine. I returned there on the 40th day. The stone was warm now. It opened before I touched it. Inside, a staircase spiraling downward, impossibly deep. I carried a lantern, but its light didn't reach far. The walls were not stone anymore. They pulsed gently, like muscle or breath, wet, warm. I felt as though I were walking down a throat. There were no sounds, just a pressure, like being underwater. At the base was a chamber spherical, silent, and at its center, a mirror, not modern, ancient, covered in soot and sea scum. I stepped closer and wiped it with my sleeve. It didn't reflect me. It reflected the lantern room, fully intact, light spinning, storm howling, and standing inside it, a man in my clothes, watching me. When I blinked, the man was gone, and I was standing in the lantern room again. Somehow, I hadn't climbed the stairs. The light was turning again a pale gold now, so bright I couldn't look at it directly. The tower groaned beneath me, like a ship shifting in deep waves. Then I heard the sea again, but it wasn't the sea. It was breathing. The fog outside parted for the first time in days, and in the distance far beyond the rocks, beyond the edge of horizon, something opened its eyes. I say eyes, but they were not eyes. They were reflections, mirrors, curved and vast, catching the light and bending it, casting it back on me. And I felt it, recognition, like something ancient was staring back and remembering what it had lost. You were mine. I grew you from silence. I staggered back, heart pounding, but the light had stopped spinning. It hung still, flickering slightly, casting shadows that no longer matched the room. The journal on the floor was open, and a new entry had appeared. You broke the rhythm. Now it remembers. I don't know if I fell asleep or passed out, but when I opened my eyes, I was outside, standing on the shore. The ocean had returned black, still, rippling with light. A boat waited at the dock, not the one that brought me here. This one was old, rotting, oars carved with spirals, and in the seat, a lantern still burning. I should have climbed in. I should have rowed, but I didn't, because something moved behind me. Something tall, thin, its arms too long, fingers like kelp, dripping salt and memory. Its face was a mirror, and in that reflection, I was smiling. That's when I understood. There was never a me to leave, only a version of the keeper that hadn't fully been written yet. The tower didn't house people. It grew them, fed them to the rhythm, taught them to forget, to watch, until they became the light itself. The final message came the next morning, scratched into the inside of my eyelids. I know how that sounds, but it's true. Every time I blink, I see it. Just 5 words. You are the warning now. It's hard to tell how long I've been here now. I think I still count days, but the sun no longer rises or sets. The sky glows in hues that don't belong to morning or night. Time bends here, or maybe I've just been bent to it. The tower is quiet now. The lantern still turns, but I no longer need to power it. It moves with me, or I move with it. I can't quite remember which came first, me or the rhythm. Sometimes I hear voices on the wind again, not words anymore. Names I almost remember. A woman's voice, soft and warm, whispering something I think I once loved. A dog barking in the distance, just once, as if tugging at some long-faded leash in my memory. But I never see them. Not really. Only shapes through the lens, flickering like film left in the rain. A boat came again last week. Empty, as always. It drifted to the edge of the dock, silent and still, with a single oar resting across its seat. It waited there for a long time, maybe hours, maybe days. No waves rocked it. No wind touched its sail. Eventually it drifted away, unbothered. I didn't follow. I never do anymore. There is someone else here now. I see them through the lens sometimes, walking along the ridge, picking their way across the stones like I once did, young, tired, carrying a bag that looks too heavy. They move like I moved, look like I looked. They pause often, as if waiting to be told to go home, but they never leave. Soon, they'll find the door in the grass, the one I once stood over, afraid to open. Soon, they'll feel the rhythm. Soon, the island will show them who they are. I've stopped writing in the logs. Not because I've run out of things to say, but because they write themselves now. Each morning, the book is already filled. Same pen, same hand, but not always my thoughts. Sometimes, I read something I haven't done yet. Sometimes, the book remembers things I didn't know I forgot. And sometimes, there's nothing at all, just page after page of blank space that hums when I turn it. The mirror is back in the lantern room. I didn't put it there. It hangs from the frame where the lamp once rested, reflecting only the horizon even when I stand in front of it. And every so often, it shows me things I'm not meant to see. A shipwreck beneath black waves. A man staring into a well that stares back. A field of people who don't move, just sway, like reeds, even though there is no wind. And once, it showed me the tower burning from the outside, and I watched myself standing inside it, untouched by flame, smiling. I don't sleep much anymore. There's no need. When I do close my eyes, I don't dream. I just wait. And when I open them again, the light is always moving, back and forth, endlessly, as it was meant to. You may be wondering how I'm telling you this, how I'm speaking if I've become whatever I am now. But that's the thing the tower remembers. It keeps all of us here, not in flesh, in function. We are not people. We are warnings. Stories carved into fog. We are what keeps the thing beneath the island dreaming. And we are what it dreams of in return. If you found this recording, or this journal, or this whisper on the radio, then you're close already. You've felt it. That subtle bend in the hallway you've walked 100 times. That mirror that doesn't quite show you. That flicker in the corner of your eye that doesn't leave when you blink. That strange ache in your bones when the light shifts like the world is checking to see if you're still facing it. You feel it now, don't you? Watching you? It doesn't matter if you believe this story. It only matters that you've heard it. Because the lighthouse doesn't just shine over the sea. It shines into you. And once the light touches you, you are never truly in the dark again. If you're still awake, a gentle tap on the like button helps us make more night stories. I signed on because I thought it would be quiet. It was late October when I got the call. The agency needed someone to finish out a final monitoring contract on a decommissioned transit tunnel beneath the mountains. The original operator had shut it down years ago after flooding and seismic concerns made further development impossible. But environmental standards still required a final season of observation before full abandonment. 4 weeks, solo duty, night watch, minimal responsibilities. They'd even provide a trailer for living space. Though I'd spend most of my time inside the access level of the tunnel itself, documenting structural drift, checking vibration monitors, and logging humidity data into a local terminal. No uplink, no radio chatter. Just me and whatever was left echoing in the dark. After the last year, that kind of quiet sounded like peace. I'd burned out hard at my last job. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow unraveling. Deadlines, fluorescent lights, a roommate who never spoke anymore. The city got loud. My thoughts got louder. I wanted someplace empty, a silence big enough to spread out inside. And this place? It felt like the end of a map. The drive out took nearly a full day. I crossed 2 counties, followed a narrowing road up into a thick, mist-fed range of pine and jagged stone. The rain started somewhere around mile marker 43 and didn't stop the entire time I was there. The mountains were like dark teeth, and the fog settled into their roots like breath from a sleeping god. The tunnel sat in a scar cut directly into the slope. From a distance, it looked like the mouth of something buried wide and low, reinforced with heavy concrete and sloping steel beams. A chain-link fence surrounded the entrance, half rusted through. 1 camera mounted on a pole, 1 keypad at the side entrance. I punched in the code they'd given me, and the door opened with a slow, wet sigh. Inside, the air was cooler than outside, and bone dry. Even with the rain above, the interior stayed preserved. Too preserved. The tunnel stretched straight for about 400 meters before curving left into the mountain. I was told that curve led to the deeper rail corridors, places too unstable to access. My job was limited to the front third, 2 observation rooms, a structural maintenance hatch, and the relay chamber. It didn't look like much, just concrete, rivets, old emergency signage. But there was a strange weight to the air, a kind of held breath, like the tunnel remembered being full of sound, motion, people. And now it was just waiting. The trailer outside was simple: a cot, a stove, a desk, a water tank with a faint metallic aftertaste, no internet, just a single hardline terminal connected to the tunnel sensors. Every night at 6 p.m., I logged in. I watched the charts scroll by vibration thresholds, audio anomalies, pressure readings. Most nights, they were flat. Most nights. The first week passed without incident. I developed a rhythm. Wake late, check the exterior for storm damage, take readings inside the tunnel, record sensor logs, return to the trailer, and fall asleep to the sound of rain on the roof. Always the rain. Inside the tunnel, I kept expecting echoes, but the walls absorbed sound strangely. My footsteps felt swallowed, muted. The air hung still, no breeze, no draft, just the faint hum of distant wiring. I brought a book with me, but I stopped reading it. The silence was dense. It filled my thoughts until there wasn't room for anything else. I started hearing things, not voices, just shapes and sound. Something like breathing, the drip of water that didn't seem to fall, the creak of metal that hadn't moved. But I told myself it was acoustics, the pressure of the mountain, the way a place this empty rearranges your senses. That's what I told myself. Until the 3rd week, when I found the door, a door that hadn't been there before. It was a Tuesday, I think. Time had already begun to warp. I'd walked the tunnel path at least 50 times by then, from the main door to the curve where the deeper line vanished into permanent dark. That curve always felt like a limit, a psychological threshold. Beyond it, no lights, no monitoring. The relay room sat just before it, with one narrow hallway feeding off it toward a maintenance closet, which I had opened and inspected on my first night. But on that Tuesday, the closet wasn't a closet anymore. The handle had changed, slightly. The industrial gray paint had peeled back to expose a seam I hadn't noticed. Thinner, cleaner, like something behind the concrete had shifted forward, showing a face that wasn't meant to be seen. I opened the door. Inside was not the storage room. It looked the same at first: tools, coils of wire, a rusted shelf with old labels, but the walls were deeper now. The concrete stretched farther back. The light reached farther. The air smelled different, too colder, layered with the scent of wet stone and something fainter, like scorched insulation. And at the very back, just visible in the tunnel light, was a second door. No handle, no label, just steel, seamless. I stood there for a long time. The longer I looked at the door, the more it seemed like it was listening. I felt exposed, like the walls were trying to memorize my posture, the rhythm of my breath, the sound of my thoughts as they unfolded. I backed away, closed the maintenance room, locked it, but I kept the key. That night, the sensor log recorded a spike. At 2:13 a.m., a low-frequency vibration registered in the main corridor. Sharp, brief, undeniable. No weather event, no seismic explanation. Just a sudden pulse through the steel, like something had taken one long step. The system flagged it. I entered a manual report. I made sure I did. But when I checked the entry the next morning, it was gone. In its place was a message. System nominal. Tunnel stable. No anomalies recorded. But I remembered the spike. I could still feel it in the soles of my boots. The days grew quieter, not in the usual way, not peaceful. Still, even the rain outside began to muffle. I'd wake and realize I couldn't hear it anymore. Not from inside the trailer, not from inside my head. It was like the tunnel had absorbed the sound entirely, as if the mountain wanted my attention turned inward. And so, slowly, I began listening. The tunnel breathes. I know how that sounds. But once you hear it, truly hear it, it never leaves you. It's not lungs. Not exactly. It's more like architecture under tension. A long, soft exhalation across stone. Faint pressure waves that pass across the walls. A rhythm that seems to follow your own breath until you realize it's actually the other way around. You begin to match it. Every time I entered the main corridor, I found myself slowing, calming, sinking. The air would settle differently each day, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, and the lights, which had once felt sterile and bright, now glowed faintly amber, like tunnel fire, reflected through dust. I couldn't tell if something was changing in the power systems or in me. Then came the reflections. It started with my flashlight. I'd sweep the beam across the tunnel walls, and for just a second, in the curved metal bands of the structural supports, I'd see a figure. Not me, not quite. They would stand just behind the column, half turned, watching, never moving, always the same distance away. Sometimes I'd look back and see only shadow. Other times, a shape that didn't belong. Once, I caught a clearer glimpse. A person in the standard gray coveralls. My uniform. Head turned slightly. No features. But they held something in their hands. A clipboard. Just like mine. I swung the light back, and they were gone. But the clipboard I dropped in panic had a new note on the top sheet. "You're further than the last one." I didn't write that. I stopped logging data manually. There was no point. The system would rewrite it overnight, always smoothing anomalies, always marking no event beside entries I knew had changed. I tried printing the logs out. The printer jammed. When I opened the panel, the inside was empty. No rollers, no paper, just a blank void with the smell of ozone. Sleep began to change. I didn't dream in the usual way. I'd close my eyes in the trailer and wake in the tunnel, walking, clipboard in hand, flashlight dim. I'd move through corridors I didn't recognize, rooms that didn't exist, chambers so large they felt planetary. And the sound, the tunnel hum beneath everything. At times, it sounded like stone. Other times, it sounded like voices laid over one another, not speaking, just repeating. I went back to the door on the 9th night, the seamless one. It was open, only slightly. A thin vertical line of black, darker than any tunnel should be. It didn't reflect my light. It absorbed it. I didn't go in, but I stood there for almost an hour, listening. And in the distance far, far past the seam, I heard something walking. Not toward me, not away, just circling, like it was tracing a pattern I hadn't yet understood. I don't remember opening the door. I only remember standing inside. That part of the tunnel shouldn't have existed, according to the schematics. The walls past the maintenance room led nowhere, just reinforced mountain. But now I stood in a narrow passage of smooth, polished concrete, slightly damp, with pale yellow strip lighting that didn't flicker, didn't hum. It was silent in a way that felt designed. The walls were clean, seamless, too clean, as though they had been poured yesterday or 1,000 years ago. Every footstep I took echoed too long. I walked for what felt like 20 or 30 meters before the hallway opened into a circular chamber. The room was wrong, not large, not small, just off, too symmetrical. The ceiling curved inward like a dome, but the walls sloped subtly, impossibly, bending the light so the corners never quite made sense. And in the center, a chair. A standard industrial chair, gray, metal, with a clipboard on the seat. I approached it. There was a single page clipped to the top. Typed text. Monospaced. Centered. Echo. Log 4. Subject 7B. Subject has entered the chamber. Time distortion at 12%. Retention index nominal. Subject is stabilizing. Subject remains unaware of previous cycles. I dropped the clipboard. It didn't clatter. It fell as if into water. When I stepped back, the air seemed to thicken. A gentle warmth began to rise from the floor the way heat lingers in old concrete after the sun sets. Only, we were under a mountain. There was no heat source. And then the walls began to pulse. Not visibly, not at first. Just in sensation. Like the room was breathing. I ran. Back down the hallway. Through the passage. Into the main corridor. But when I reached the end, the maintenance room was gone, replaced with another doorway. Same frame, same size, different space. And behind me, silence. No breathing walls, no footsteps, no echo, just a strange smell like scorched dust and static. The air you get before lightning strikes something close. I tried to retrace my steps. It didn't work. Every turn looked like the last. And then I noticed something else. The concrete wasn't dry anymore. It glistened slightly under the beam of my flashlight. Not with moisture, with clarity. As if the walls weren't solid at all, just surfaces so smooth they reflected thought itself. When I looked into them too long, I started to see things. Myself. From behind. My trailer, lights off, door open. The tunnel, flooded, empty. The clipboard, lying in a room that wasn't mine. That night, when I returned to the trailer, something had changed. The bed was made too perfectly. My journal was open, but not to the last page I'd written. A new entry stared up at me. You stayed longer this time. You're remembering faster. We are almost aligned. I didn't write those words, but I recognized the handwriting. My own, just slightly too clean, too centered, too practiced. I stopped sleeping after that, or I think I did. It's hard to say. The nights felt like days. The rain came and went with no rhythm. I would sit at my desk, stare at the live sensor feed, and watch data populate that made no physical sense. Temperature readings from rooms I'd never entered. Motion detections at 3:33 a.m. in all sectors simultaneously. Audio anomalies that didn't register as sound waves, just pressure fluctuations, as if the tunnel had heard something it didn't like. I began to see the figure more clearly, always in the reflection, never directly, in the polished steel of the rail ties, in the glass of my wristwatch, once in the dark surface of my cold tea. The same person, same gray uniform, same flashlight, but they were moving differently, not walking, pacing, studying, tracing my route a few seconds ahead of me. And sometimes I would freeze mid-step because I was certain I just watched myself go around the corner before I actually did. I started finding other clipboards, always in quiet corners, always blank, until I touched them, and then the pages would fill, slowly, like ink soaking up from beneath. Subject 7B encountered echo loop. Subject persisted past door 2. Subject resisting overwrite. New trajectory mapped. It was a system, a living system, tracking not just my body, but my thoughts. And the more I noticed it, the more the tunnel responded. Eventually, I stopped leaving the tunnel. I would lie to myself. I told myself I'd return to the trailer, that I just needed one more sweep. But each night, I walked deeper, past the maintenance corridor, past the new hallway, into chambers that didn't exist in blueprints or memory. At some point, the floor markings changed. Not construction tape or directional paint, but etchings in the concrete. Symbols, patterns, like rail maps, rendered in some language older than steel, and they glowed when I passed, only faintly, but enough to see my shadow elongate across them. And when I turned around, There was nothing behind me, but the scent of myself, familiar, recognizable, as if I had passed through here dozens of times before. That night, I found the recording room. Not a studio, not audio. Just a long, rectangular space lined with what looked like filing drawers, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, each with a name, each with a single date, and one, halfway down the third row, marked Holloway, Matthew Cycle, 7B, currently open. When I pulled the drawer open, there was no file, just a mirror, polished glass. I looked in, and for the first time, my reflection blinked after me. There's a moment subtle and quiet where you stop being afraid and start being included. It happened somewhere between the mirror drawer and the long hallway that followed. I didn't plan to walk through it. I just found myself doing it calmly, like stepping from one breath to the next. And then the tunnel changed. The concrete gave way to stone, the smooth structure to something more natural, but no less deliberate. The path sloped slightly downward, then straightened again. I remember running my hand along the wall and feeling the grooves of something carved deep beneath the surface. Not symbols, not quite. Fossils of memory. Every few paces, the light shifted, not brighter, just aware. The same sensation I'd felt in the relay chamber weeks ago. The sense that the tunnel wasn't observing me. It was monitoring its own thought of me. Somewhere ahead, water dripped steadily. The sound echoed long and low, and in the middle of the hallway, I saw the door, the same as the others. No handle. Seamless. Flush with the wall. But this one wasn't closed. It was open. Just enough for light to spill from inside, a soft golden glow, warm and strangely human, like the back room of an old library, or a memory of comfort you'd long forgotten. I stepped inside. It wasn't a room. It was an observation deck. At least, that's the only word that fit. The floor beneath me was polished obsidian, but it gave slightly underfoot, like dense rubber, and the ceiling arched into darkness, higher than it should have been, lit by strands of flickering amber light, suspended in impossible configurations like stars that someone had rethreaded. But it wasn't what was above that held me. It was what was below. The deck looked out over a vast, circular void, hundreds of meters deep, maybe more, lined with what looked like archives, drawers, tapes, conduits, copper spools of data, memories. Not digital, not paper, but preserved loops, lives, layered in loops of repeating thought, tethered to something vast and pulsing at the core. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. The tunnel didn't contain memories. It was one, a recursive structure designed to remember to preserve identity through simulation. But it had no identity of its own, so it used ours. A console pulsed behind me, just a single screen. A prompt awaited. Cycle 7B. Status active. Subject Holloway, Matthew. Duration 41 days. Completion index 98%. Proceed with overwrite? Yes. No. I stared at it, and something inside me folded, because I understood then. This wasn't the first time I'd seen that screen. This wasn't the first time I'd stood here. The tunnel had brought me to this room in every cycle. It let me see. It let me almost understand. And every time I made the same decision, I told myself I had a choice. That was the illusion. But the loop needed me to believe it was mine. It needed one final consent, one final willing breath, one final step into submission. I stepped back. I whispered, "No," but my voice came out after I'd already heard it. The screen changed. The prompt blinked away. A new line appeared. Subject has reached awareness threshold. Integrity. Stable. Memory assimilation complete. Cycle 7C will begin shortly. I stumbled backward. The air grew warmer, denser. The lights above shifted, flickered in patterns I recognized, but couldn't name. And below, the archive began to pulse. Not rapidly, just with slow certainty. A heartbeat made from recollection. It was starting again. I ran. Back through the corridor, across the hall, past mirrored walls and walls that no longer had reflections. My breath came sharp and distant, like I was hearing it from another version of myself one layer behind. Everything looked the same, but none of it was real. The tunnel had rebuilt itself as I moved, reassembled from my expectations, from memories it had memorized better than I could. I reached the surface door. It was gone. In its place, the beginning of the tunnel, dry, still, waiting. The sound of rain had stopped. In my trailer, the lights were on. The kettle whistled gently. My journal sat open on the desk. I looked. The last entry was one I hadn't written, but it was in my hand. Arrival day, October 27th. Starting tonight, shift. Tunnel quiet so far. Should be a peaceful assignment. The next line was already beginning to write itself. Letter by letter. My fingers ached. My memory stuttered. I blinked and sat down. I've stopped checking the calendar. I know the date it claims. I know what the system says. But I also know I've been here longer than that. Much longer. There's no more panic, no more fighting, just the slow recognition that something is still watching through me. Or perhaps is me. I go through the motions each day. Walk the tunnel. Check the sensor log. Fill out my clipboard. File reports that disappear the moment I close the binder. Sleep, or dream, or don't. Repeat. The walls remember. That's what I understand now. They don't age like we do. They don't rot or forget. They just collect. Footsteps, words, thoughts. They record you until you are a pattern, and then they run you again the way a song replays inside your head without permission. But the melody changes slightly, just enough to convince you it's still yours. Sometimes I see the others, not clearly, just out of the corner of my eye, shapes at the curve of the tunnel, seated in the flicker of the relay room, pacing behind the false mirrors. They wear my uniform. They hold my clipboard. They trace paths I once walked. Sometimes they whisper, not words, just fragments. The sound of a door I forgot opening. The breath I didn't know I took. And always the hum, that soft rhythmic tone beneath the structure, like the deepest part of a song you can't unhear. the part that shapes how you feel without needing a lyric. One night last night, I woke in the tunnel. No trailer, no cot, just me, standing near the old emergency signage, flashlight in hand, even though I hadn't brought it. My breath fogged in front of me, but the air wasn't cold, only wet, like a held breath. There was something scratched into the wall beside me. 5 words, etched shallow but wide. You're writing this from inside. I touched it, and for a moment, I could remember everything. All the versions, all the cycles, all the names I'd had. They all blurred together different, but always close enough to be believable. All summoned by some quiet need. A break, a job, a place to disappear. The tunnel always gives you what you ask for, and then it keeps you. I found the door again today, the one with no handle, open as always. Inside, a room waiting with the same chair, the same clipboard, the same message glowing faint on the screen. Cycle, Ada, ready to begin. And for the first time, I realized the screen wasn't asking me anything. It was informing me. I stepped back. The lights blinked off. A soft tone played, and a whisper passed through the floor, not from under it, but inside it. A voice I almost remembered. It's time. So now I'm writing this. One last entry. Not for the record, not for a supervisor, but for whoever finds this page. If there's still a page, if I'm still separate from the structure at all, if memory is still something I have, and not just something I am, you might think you found this place by accident. You didn't. You might think the rain brought you here. It didn't. You might think your mind is unraveling. It is, but not how you fear. It's being reorganized, reshelved, retitled, because the tunnel doesn't want your body. It wants your story, your pacing, your breath, your loops, and when it has enough of them, enough of you, it becomes you. And you're just the next archivist, the next echo, the next arrival. So walk the halls, check the log, report the silence, and when you reach the door, ask yourself, are you the one entering the tunnel, or has it already walked into you? If sleep finds you, let this rain keep playing, or drift to our next tale on screen.